I promised you a practice transcription exercise at the beginning of every class. And so this is today's practice transcription exercise. Who wants to do, perhaps you, the?
Okay, the shape is like a 6 backwards with a thing up.
That kind of, the sign of the devil.
And schwa.
Schwa. Any objections? Does that seem? Okay. Skanky. I know someone here must be an expert on skanky. Skanky? Sir, you in the spotlight with the, yes, you who's smiling. Yeah, the one with the finger on your chest. Oh, however did I find you? Are you here with a guest? Maybe you could get a tip from her.
Yes. Okay.
So far, you're doing really well. Yeah. Skanky. We're looking for eh.
EI.
EI would have been A, okay? And maybe A, skanky. Skanky. No, I think I said skanky. Ah. And that's the sign for ah. What's next? What's next?
K.
You are...
IG.
Okay. So, you have a hand up. Maybe you could pronounce what's transcribed here. Can you do that?
Yeah, I was going to change something.
Well, why don't you pronounce what's transcribed?
Yeah, key.
Scan key. Scan key. And what I said was skanky. Do you hear the difference? So, right, what is it there? It's this sound, which is nga, not na. Okay? So, yeah, that's the point of skanky here. It's damn hard to hear nga versus na. So keep your ears peeled. Sir.
Oh, I have a question. For the A where it is, could it now be the EI because of fake English? Because I like to say skanky.
Yeah, that's what she wanted me to do. This sound. Could be. So that this vowel is A, this vowel is A. A, A. And listen to skanky. Not so easy to tell which it is, right? I think. My guess was A. If your guess was A, as hers was, that's close enough, probably. The skanky, klepto. Klepto. Who'll be the klepto here? Sir.
Okay.
This thing? Okay. OW. How's it look? Any objections? Klepto. Yep. Bids. Klepto bids. I like that cap. How should I do it? Bids.
Capital I. D. C.
Z. Bids. Yeah, bids. Notice it's not bids with an S, a voiceless alveolar fricative. It's bids with a Z. Okay? That's another thing that's hard to hear. So keep your ears peeled for those things that are spelled with voiceless consonants using the orthography. They're oftentimes voiced. Okay?
Did I do that first?
You want to do the next? Sure.
D.
Like this. Hi. Yeah. Any objections? Ma'am?
Well, I have a question about the capital I versus the I with
Yeah. This versus this.
I mean, is it possible that you could say this with each eye in turn? Because I don't really understand how to distinguish the two.
Here's a clue, okay? I think this will work. The sound quality between these two it's very, very different. It's very, very slight, the difference between them. So it is hard to hear I versus I. I think you can feel it in your mouth more easily than you can hear it. But here's a clue. If you're looking at a word and the vowel in the syllable that you're looking at is stressed, okay, it's probably this. Okay. If it's unstressed, it might be that. Yeah, so in bid, that's stressed. In roses, the first syllable is stressed, but the second isn't. What's the difference? Well, something to do with volume, something to do with loudness. Roses, the first syllable's a little louder than the second. So that might help. Any questions about this? Well, last time I tried to convince you that in addition, that your knowledge of these words that we've been looking at very closely consists of information of two different kinds. On the one hand, you've memorized something about the sequence of sounds that makes up a word. That's really just nothing more than sheer memorization on a word-by-word basis. D, A, G means one thing in that order, dog, and another thing in the other order, God. Yeah? You have just memorized that. So that's one part of your knowledge about what these words are. And the second part has something to do not with the sounds that make up words, but rather how, a general pattern in how those sounds should be pronounced. And I introduced that to you last time by looking at syllables. So this was the sentence that you transcribed for me last time. What is this again? Yeah. And I pointed out that in your pronunciation of minty, there was a timing of these phones that put a pause right here. So we have minty. We don't have minty or mint-y. It's minty. That's the way you say that word. Same sequence of phones, grouped slightly differently, timed slightly differently. And the same is true for bismol. There's a pause right here between z and m. It's bis-mol. It's not bismol, nor is it bism-all. Okay? And part of the reason it's not one of these things over here is because there are certain allowances, there are certain constraints on which groups of phones can be at the beginnings or ends of syllables, which groups of consonants in particular can be. So for instance, and I gave names to those. That's what this slide is reminding me to say again. Onset is the name for that collection of consonants that begin a syllable. Coda is what we call that collection of consonants that end a syllable. And these constraints are known as phonotactic constraints. They say for any given language which collection of consonants can be onsets or codas. I tried to lead you. You were much less brave than Misato, our Japanese speaker, who seems to have not come back. I tried to show you that the constraints on what could be onsets or codas in Japanese are very different than what they are in English. But these constraints are present, though they differ, in every language, and they have a role in how syllables are broken up. just to give you an illustration of some syllables and how they divide up, and also to show you that not every syllable has to have an onset or a coda. Here are some examples. So like this is the word ban, and here ba is the onset of this one syllable word, na is its coda. Here this word an has no onset, just a coda. Here this word a has neither onset nor coda. There's no consonants at all in it. And in these other examples, plank and play, I've showed you some examples of English onsets and codas that can have more than one consonant in them. Pla and nk in the case of plank. Okay? Every syllable, you'll notice, though, has a vowel. It's just the beginnings and endings of syllables made up of these consonants constrained by phonotactic constraints that can be optional, that can be absent. Well, they play a role, as I said. So, for instance, minty isn't minty because nt isn't a good syllable. In particular, what's bad about it is that nt is not a way in which syllables can start in English. The phonotactic constraints of English onsets prevent nt. And similarly, bismol is not, well, suddenly the vowel has changed here. I think that's supposed to be an uppercase I. It isn't bismol because, well, there's something wrong with zmal. Zmal isn't a possible syllable in English because zma can't be an onset. English says no to zma. Okay? Part of knowing, then, how syllables are broken up is knowing which collections of phones can be in onsets and codas. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a hard thing to know. There's a lot of information in there that you have memorized. I won't teach you too much about what the phonotactic constraints of English actually are. Instead, I will let you discover... Oh, I guess I will teach you this, though. Should I? Yes. I'll teach you something about what onsets can look like in English. The biggest onset that English allows is an onset that has 3 consonants in it. There are no onsets bigger than that. That's the biggest we have. And if we have an onset with 3 consonants in them, the first must be sa. The second can be pa, for some ta and ka. And the third, well, the third, and this is why it's so complicated, the third depends on what the second is. If it's pa, then the third consonant can be la, ra, or ya. Here's some examples. Spla, spra, and spya, as in spleen, spray, and spew. Spew. Right? Okay. If the second consonant is a ka, then the third can be, again, la, ra, or ya, but in addition, wa. So we have squa, skya, skla, and skra, as in these words. Okay. This, by the way, is all in the lecture notes posted on the website. Not only this, but it's written in a way that makes all of this perfectly clear, unlike my lecture. If the second sound is ta, then there's just 2 choices, ya or ra. So we find things like stya in bastion or stra in string. Not every English speaker allows ta here. I don't, for instance. Instead of ta, I say cha. So I don't say bastion. I say bastion. I don't say string. I say string. Can you hear the difference? Okay. So for some, the ta gets pronounced as an affricate, cha, instead. That's the biggest onsets that English allows. No more sounds. And if they're this big, that's what they look like. Somehow, ladies and gentlemen, this is in your head. I don't know how, but you know it. All right, that's a constraint on onsets that I'll teach you. The other one I want you to discover. Well, the other one that we'll learn in this class, I want you to discover. And that's the purpose of the last question on this week's homework assignment. In that question, here it is, I ask you to discover something about codas in English. Okay, so here's the exercise. I want you to consider all of those codas, so those are the consonants that are at the ends of syllables, that are made up of two sounds, one of which is pa, ba, ta, da, ka, or ga. Those are all the stops in English, except glottal stop and those which are nasal. Okay? So consider all those codas made up of two sounds, one of which is from this list, and the other of which is a stop or a fricative of English. Again, ignore glottal stops. I want you to consider all those combinations. That's a hell of a lot of them. And figure out which are possible and which are not. Okay. So like for instance, we can tell from this word here, cusp, that spa is a possible combination of a fricative and a stop making up a coda. Cusp, right? You can say that word, it sounds like English. It is English. And it has a coda made up of spa. By contrast, if you look for a word that ends this way, pn, you won't find one in English. And moreover, if you make up a word that ends that way, like I have with cup I get a little too excited sometimes, I have to confess. Like I did with cupna, it won't sound like it could be an English word because it violates the phonotactic constraints of English. Do you see? So, pna, that cannot be a coda in English. So that's what I want you to do. Figure out for all these combinations which are good ones, which are bad ones. The way you can do that is try and find words that end with the consonants that you're trying to determine whether make a good coda or not. Or failing that, make up a word that ends with those consonants and ask yourself or someone who is an English speaker, does that sound like it could be an English word? Do you see? I've tried to make this easier by giving you this table. So what this table does is it lists the consonants, the stops I want you to include in these combinations, pa, ba, ta, da, ka, ka. And then it lists all the stops and fricatives, and it asks you to consider their combinations in these cells. So for instance, in this cell is S before pa, spa. That's a possible coda, and so this is a good combination, S before pa. Here's an example that illustrates it. Cusp. Okay. By contrast, here we've got na after pa. This would be kapna, for instance, and that's bad. Okay. Do you see how to read this table? In the cells that I've X'd out are cases where the particular combination that would reside in that cell is found elsewhere in the table. Okay? So these are just where duplicates are found. Do you see? So what I want you to do for this assignment is fill in this table. For each of these cells, tell me yes, or no, that's a possible combination? And if yes, if you can, show me a word that actually ends with that coda. Is it, are you, this you should do with some help. Find a group of friends and divvy it up. Okay. Ma'am?
Can we maybe do one example, like, so S after P would be like, we say like cups?
Yeah. So here this cell is asking, is S after pa a possible coda? It is. And what was your word? Cups is an illustration of it. Yep. Cups ends with a coda that has pa-sa. Sir?
And do you want us to include the word in that cell with it?
It would be, you don't need to put a word in a cell where you think it's possible, but if you happen to have one, it might be handy to put it there. Because if we have an argument later about it, you can say, but wait, I showed you the word. Okay? Sir?
I'm just thinking about like words that aren't, you wouldn't technically call any of those words like Ptolemy or like need from Dr. Seuss. I don't know, like, define what's in.
Yeah. So question, what about words like Ptolemy? That's the name of some Greek dude, I think. Yeah. And then what was your other name?
Need from...
Kneed.
No. Need.
T?
T-H and voice.
Sneed.
From Dr. Seuss.
From Dr. Seuss. Sneed. Well, let me ask you. So, that great Greek, whatever he was, philosopher, spelled P, that we spell P-T-O. Okay, look, not only do I get excited, but I also can't spell. Right? I have some failures, and they might become apparent more so as the class goes on. So how do you say that guy's name? Ptolemy, right? If someone said to you, Ptolemy, like you did just a moment ago, you'd have probably one of two thoughts. You'd think, okay, freak, right? Which is not the thought I had, of course. Yeah. Or you'd think, oh, this dude's Greek. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which actually isn't quite the thought I had either. But
I'm pretty sure he's Egyptian.
oh, is he Egyptian? Oh well. Those Egyptians, those Greeks, they commingled. All right. So probably, my guess is that pata is not a possible onset in English. Because actually you got to go to this bloody Greek's name, or Egyptian's name, to find an example, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's safe to say that we're working phonetically rather than orthographically?
Yeah, right. We are never working orthographically. One orthographic work in this class, and it's an instant F. Not only an instant F, but you will be humiliated publicly. Is that clear? Okay. All right. Good luck on this. Any more questions on the homework? Yes, ma'am.
The ones that are just the same letter in a row.
What about, she's asking me, well, what about this cell? This cell is, pa before pa. Yeah? I think this is what it would sound like. Cap. Yeah, that's what I have in mind for that cell. Good. So now it's time for the rule. So one aspect of the rule that builds syllables is this business about, well, what sounds can be in onsets and codas? What are the legitimate combinations of consonants at the beginnings and endings of syllables? And the second part of this rule is, well, it's just a little procedure. It runs through a word. It looks at every phone that's in that word, and it makes a decision about where that phone will be in a syllable. And there are three possible places it could be. It could be in an onset, the beginning. It could be at the end, in a coda. Or it could be the thing that every syllable has, the thing that stands in the middle around which onsets and codas wrap, those things are called nucleuses, or, if you're highfalutin, nuclei. Okay. So the first step in this procedure is to identify those things that will be in the center of every syllable, the nuclei. Vowels are always nuclei. That's the only thing they can ever be in a syllable. So for simple words, like the one I taught you last time, Burgestand, those vowels will all be nuclei. So the first step, scan through the word, look at all the things that could be the centers or are the centers of syllables, and label them nuclei, which I'll do with this little n and a line drawn down showing that this sound is that thing. In some words, I'll show you one in a minute, things other than vowels can be nuclei. Vowels are always nuclei, nothing ever anything else. But there are other things which can be nuclei, and those include these sounds, na, ma, ra, and l. Okay. I'll show you an example later. There's not one here. Okay. That's step one. Step two. Scan back through the word. Go up to every nucleus. Look to its left. And collect up as many consonants as the phonotactic constraints say you can into onsets. So, for Burgestand, for instance, the procedure would scan through, find the nucleus that we got here with this vowel, look to the consonants to its left and ask, can that be an onset? If it can be, make it one. Ba can be an onset, so it's an onset. I'll do that by labeling it with an O for onset. Okay. We're done there. We scan on, find the next nucleus. We look at the consonants to the left of it, and we ask, how many of those can be in an onset? Can g be an onset? Yes, the phonotactic constraints of English reply. So we label them as an onset. Can erga be an onset? Does a word that starts with erga sound like a word that could be English? No. And so, that's it. Erga can't be an onset. G can be. That's as many as we can make an onset here. We scan forward. We find the next nucleus that we identified in the first step. We look at the consonants to its left, and we ask, how many of these can be an onset? Ta can be an onset. Can sta? Yes. Many words start with sta. So both of these are onsets. Okay. I'll indicate that by calling this onset sta. Saying this onset has these two things in it. That's what this little graph means. Okay? Bam.
Would you just do the T instead of the ST as its onset?
No. So question, can I just take ta and leave sa out? No. This step says no. You'll take as many consonants as you can to the left of a nucleus and make them an onset. Mm-hmm. You only stop when you can't include a consonant, as happened here. The next step goes back through the word, looks at all the consonants that are left over, and makes them, if it can, codas. So in our word Burgestand, what does Burgestand mean again? What is it? The hair growing out of the top of your ears. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's one thing you learn in this class, it should be of the existence of Burgestands. Last step, we go through, find a nucleus. Here's an unassigned sound. It wasn't an onset. And we ask, can it be a coda? Can be a coda? Yes. So it is here. We scan forward. These two sounds were unassigned. They weren't given a position in a syllable. N and d. Can these be codas? Do syllables end with nd in English? Yes, they're possible codas, so they are made a coda here. Sir?
If you have a word like berg, would the RNG become a...
Like berg. Yes. So in berg, and g are a coda. Right. But here they're not. They've been split. Interesting. So let's come back to that. Bergestand. Okay? And the last step bundles up nuclei with the onsets and codas, if there should happen to be them, into syllables. Okay? We use a lowercase sigma to indicate a syllable. So what this last step does is it goes to every nucleus, it looks to see if there's an onset or a coda after it, and if there is, it bundles them up, as shown in these beautiful diagrams, into a syllable. Okay? Here, there's only an onset, there's no coda, so this syllable has just those two parts. Ma'am?
Does the be an onset?
Here?
Yeah.
So could this be an onset for the syllable that follows? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. If it could be, well, of course, ga would have to be part of that onset too, right? And so now this boils down to the question, can g or g be an onset? No, and so that's why no. Okay? Because the phonotactic constraints of English, they allow g to be an onset, they allow to be an onset, but they don't allow an onset to have both of them with coming before g. Or g, no good. Okay? Well, except for the frog. Sir?
You say a syllable to each nucleus plus any onsets or nuclei that's surrounding the union, onsets and codas?
I did. Yes, thank you. Would you like to be a TA for this class? You can just... Oh. Good answer. Yeah. All right. Okay. So is it... That's the rule. Let's look at some more examples just to get a fix on how it's working. So I told you that every vowel is a nucleus, but also that sometimes other kinds of sounds can be nuclei. And among the sounds that can be nuclei is And that's what's happening in this word. What's this word?
Burger.
Burger. Yeah, burger. Okay. The first syllable has ba as its onset, this as its coda, and well, the vowel I have no clue, but I'll transcribe it with this barred I. Okay? So these three parts make the first syllable. But the second syllable probably doesn't have a vowel in it. Instead, it's probably itself that's being the nucleus of this syllable. So, for me to convince you of that, I need you to say burger, but I want you to say burger, and while you're saying it, I want you to pay attention to what your tongue is doing. Okay, so first, say burr. Burr. All right, now where is your tongue at the end of burr? Can you feel that? Burr. Burr. Fix on that feeling. That's Okay? Now say burger. Burger. Does your tongue ever change? No. It's all isn't it? It's like burr. Right? But then there's that damn g in there. Oh, sorry about the damn. So, if you pay attention to how you make the g, what you're doing is you're saying burr, and then the back of your tongue makes that stop at the velum that is ga. Can you feel that? Burger. The front of the tongue, it doesn't move. It's just the back. You see? There's no vowel between g and It's straight through here with a little g in between. Okay? So here's a case where a syllable has no vowel in it, and instead the nucleus of this syllable is something else. Okay? Here's another example. What's this word? Middle. Okay? So again, the first syllable is me, but now pay attention to how you say dol. Middle. 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 When you say dull, the tip of your tongue will come up to the alveolar ridge to make that stop that is duh, the onset of that second syllable. Does it ever leave the alveolar ridge? Middle. Pa is still there at the end of the word, right? Middle. If you had made a vowel here between duh and ol, the tip of the tongue would have had to come off the alveolar ridge to make that vowel. It's not mid-dull, it's middle. Can you feel that? So what's happening here is you make the closure at the alveolar ridge with your tongue for duh, and then you lower the sides, which is what gives you ol. Middle. Middle. You don't do that.
I say middle.
You say middle?
I say middle. I like break it up.
I see. Do you talk quickly?
Yeah, I talk really strangely. I say my vowels weirdly.
You do talk very strangely. I was going to make that remark myself. Middle. Okay, so for you, this would not be, it would neither be the right transcription, nor would it be the right syllable. There would be an in here for you. And that would be the nucleus. Okay? Sir?
Do you want us to mark the nucleus like that? Do you want us to mark like that, or just show us?
Yeah, so you'll see that when this has been syllabified, I've put ol in this position. But there's also, if you can see it, a little line under this L. That's the symbol in the IPA for indicating that a consonant is being used as a nucleus of a syllable. Okay? And we say about those consonants, so we say about ol here and about and burger, that they are syllabic. They are the things that make the syllable. They're the nuclei. Okay? So, yeah, put a little line, a little vertical line underneath a consonant in your IPA transcriptions when that consonant is the nucleus and not part of an onset or a coda. Sir?
Can there be a word that has an onset and a coda but no nucleus?
No. There cannot be a syllable that fails to have a nucleus. Yeah. That's true for English. There are a group of languages spoken in the Pacific coast up towards Alaska where it's hard to find even a single vowel anywhere along the coast there. So I can't tell you about those. English, always nucleus. Now, the procedure I taught you has a certain order to it. So there's 4 steps. The last, of course, is making the syllables out of all of the sounds that have been signed to position. And the first of which is finding the things that will anchor these syllables, finding the nuclei. But the second 2 come in a particular order. The first step gathers onsets. The second step looks at what remains, and if it can, makes codas out of them. Okay? That ordering has a certain effect. It means that if you have a word with a consonant standing somewhere in the middle, and if that consonant could be a coda or could be an onset, it'll be an onset. You see? So, like for instance, because the first thing that will happen to a consonant is it will have a chance to be an onset. That's the first step in assigning consonants positions, make them onsets. So like for instance, here's a perfectly good word in English. What is it?
Tie.
Tie. And it shows us that ta can be an onset, right? So the phonotactic constraints of English allow ta to be an onset. And this is a perfectly good word of English. What's this? Might. And here we learn that ta can be a coda as well, right? The phonotactic constraints of English allow ta to be onset or coda. But in this word, my freshman year downfall, The ta, which stands in the middle of this word, cannot be a coda. Though, of course, being a coda is something that's perfectly fine for a ta. We don't call this thing might I. Right? We call this thing my tai. My tai. My tai, well, those are two words. Do you see? And the reason for that is because when it comes time to syllabify this, after we've found the nuclei here, the first step says, well, make this an onset if you can. And you can. And only then, only when onsets have been discovered, can you go in and scoop up what's left to make codas. Here's a general rule about English then. That rule is that if a sound or a group of sounds can be an onset, and they're in a position in a word where they're able to be either an onset or a coda, because, say, they come in the middle of that word, they will be onsets. They won't be codas. In fact, that's not just true of English. It seems to be true of every language that's been studied. In fact, if you think about it, it's what we discovered about Japanese. Remember Japanese? Remember Misato, who's now dropped? What we discovered there was that certain consonants could be onsets. We found many examples of onsets. But codas, not so many. Why? Well, here's the truth about Japanese. Japanese onsets and codas, none of them have more than one sound in them. That's the biggest onset and coda that Japanese allows. As a consequence, there will be no word in Japanese that has more than one consonant between two vowels. If there were, that's not quite saying it right, am I? All these consonants in the middles of words, they could be perhaps codas, but because they can be onsets, they have to be onsets. Do you see? Yeah, me too. I'm not sure either. That's all for today. I'll see you on Wednesday.